You've been carrying things your whole life. Crystals in your jacket pocket, a specific stone you found on a riverbank and never quite put down, pieces of the earth you selected, maybe not even fully knowing why, just that something in you recognized something in them. And maybe you've had experiences you couldn't explain, a shift in the room, a pressure behind the sternum, a quiet that was too quiet to be ordinary. Most people who notice those things write them off. Coincidence, placebo, imagination running ahead of reason. But what if what you were carrying was, from a specific and ancient cosmological perspective, the exact material the controlling forces of this reality would prefer you left on the ground? What if certain stones aren't spiritually neutral? Not because of folklore, not because of a crystal shop's marketing copy, but because of what they represent structurally within a worldview that was systematically hunted, burned, and buried for over a millennium. That's not a metaphor, that's a historical claim, and this video is going to walk you through it carefully. We're going to look at what the Gnostic tradition actually teaches about the material world, about the forces that shape it, about the specific qualities those forces cannot tolerate, and why 5 particular stones keep appearing across multiple suppressed texts as direct symbolic countersignatures to archonic control. Stay with me. This one goes deep. I'm Daniel, and this is Gnostic Talk. Let's start with what the Archons actually are, because the popular version of this idea has been flattened almost beyond recognition. Most people who've encountered the term think of the Archons as demons, evil spirits, some kind of supernatural antagonist borrowed from ancient mythology and retrofitted into modern conspiracy frameworks. That version is almost entirely useless for understanding what the Gnostic texts actually describe. The Apocryphon of John, one of the foundational documents recovered at Nag Hammadi in 1945, is specific. The Archons are not rebellious angels. They are administrators, governors, structural forces that maintain the architecture of the material world, not out of malice in the human sense, but out of something the texts call deficiency, incompleteness, a kind of ontological poverty that expresses itself as the compulsion to dominate, to limit, to contain. The demiurge, their source and sovereign, created this realm not from the fullness of divine light, what the texts call the pleroma, but from a fragmented reflection of it. And the world that results from fragmented creation is, structurally, a world oriented toward keeping its inhabitants similarly fragmented, unaware, contained within their limitations. Here's where it gets cosmically significant. The Apocryphon of John doesn't just name the Archons in the abstract, it enumerates them. 7 of them, each governing a layer of material existence, each associated with specific qualities: arrogance, ignorance, envy, desire for domination, the compulsion to consume. These aren't poetic descriptions, they're functional descriptions. They describe what these forces do to human consciousness when consciousness remains unawakened. Now, and this is the part most modern summaries skip entirely, the same text that describes the Archons' nature also describes what they fear. Not ritual opposition, not prayers directed against them, not spiritual warfare in the conventional sense. What they cannot tolerate is gnosis, direct interior recognition of one's true nature as a fragment of the divine light temporarily housed in matter. Because the moment that recognition occurs, the moment the spark remembers what it is, the Archon's leverage dissolves. You cannot administrate someone who no longer believes they are only what the administration says they are. That's the core. Hold that. Because everything that follows, the stones, the symbolism, the history of suppression, orbits that central point. The Archons fear awakening. And anything that facilitates awakening becomes, within Gnostic cosmology, a kind of counter-signature, a material object or practice that points inward rather than keeping you tethered to the surface of things. I spent several nights working through the Hypostasis of the Archons, another Nag Hammadi text, formerly known as the Reality of the Rulers. And what struck me was how precisely the text maps the relationship between archonic control and material entanglement. The Archons don't force ignorance, they cultivate it. They create conditions in which ignorance feels like comfort, like normalcy, like the only available orientation. Stones, within this framework, become interesting precisely because they are material objects that the Gnostic tradition associates not with material entanglement, but with qualities that pierce it: light, clarity, incorruptibility, the very qualities the Archon's realm is structured to suppress. That's the threshold we're standing on before we go further. One viewer, after my video on the monad call, "I stopped praying and called the monad instead. Here's what changed," left a comment that I kept coming back to while researching this. They wrote, "It's like I've been operating inside a system I never agreed to, and now I can't unsee the walls." That's it. That's exactly the phenomenology the Apocryphon of John is describing. The Archons don't lock the door. They make you forget there's a door. Now, here's what I want to address directly, because I know it's the question sitting in the back of a lot of minds right now. Why stones? Why would physical objects, silica, mineral crystal, compressed earth, carry any cosmological significance at all within a tradition that viewed the material world as fundamentally compromised? Isn't that a contradiction? It seems like one. But the texts resolve it in a way that's more sophisticated than the surface tension suggests. The Gnostic framework doesn't say matter is evil. That's the simplification that Orthodox critics used to dismiss the tradition, and it's largely inaccurate. What the texts say, particularly the Gospel of Philip, which was also recovered at Nag Hammadi, is that matter is not neutral. It is differentially charged. Some configurations of the material world carry, or more precisely, reflect, qualities of the pleroma, the divine fullness, more clearly than others. Light passes through certain things and is absorbed by others. That's not mysticism, that's optics. The Gnostic use of material symbolism operates on an analogous principle. Gemstones and specific minerals appear throughout ancient sacred writing not because they are magical in isolation, but because of what their physical properties were understood to symbolize: transparency, resistance to corruption, the ability to hold light without being destroyed by it. These are pleronic qualities, and within a cosmology that understands the divine as light and the material world as a system designed to diffuse and obscure that light, an object that resists diffusion and holds clarity becomes symbolically significant. The Gospel of Philip states this almost bluntly: light and darkness, life and death, right and left, are brothers of one another. It is not possible to separate them from one another. What matters is which orientation you bring to what you encounter. Here's the analogy that cracked this open for me when I was deep in the research. Imagine a room designed to produce noise. Every surface is angled to bounce sound chaotically. You walk into that room and everything becomes indistinct, reverberant, impossible to parse. Now imagine you're holding an object that absorbs sound, that creates in its immediate vicinity a small zone of relative stillness. It doesn't silence the whole room, but it changes your immediate relationship to the room's chaos. That's the symbolic function of stones within Gnostic cosmological logic. They don't defeat the Archons. They don't create magical force fields. What they do, what they were understood to do, is serve as material anchors for a quality of attention the Archon system is specifically structured to prevent: stillness, clarity, interior focus. And the specific 5 stones I'm going to walk through aren't arbitrary. They surface across multiple texts and traditions with striking consistency. I personally think this is the most underrated dimension of Gnostic material culture: the degree to which specific stones were used as intentional countersignatures to specific archonic qualities, not as superstition, but as applied cosmological symbolism. Before I name them, I want to establish one more thing. The suppression of this material wasn't careless. Irenaeus, Bishop of Lyon, writing his treatise Against Heresies around 180 CE, specifically targets the way Gnostic communities used objects, symbols, and practices to maintain interior orientation outside of institutional oversight. His language is sharp. He's not merely theologically concerned, he's administratively threatened. You cannot collect tithes from someone whose spiritual practice requires no intermediary and no institution. Can't exactly put a collection plate in front of someone's internal awakening. Just saying. That's my one editorial interjection. I'll move on. Because understanding why these stones were threatening requires understanding what each one counters. And that means walking through the specific archonic qualities they correspond to, one by one. Let's go through them. Carefully, because I want to be precise about what I'm claiming here and what I'm not. I'm not claiming these stones have inherent supernatural power. I'm not claiming that holding a piece of black tourmaline will cause the governing forces of material reality to flee in distress. Before we continue, there's something I want to place in your hands. We've gathered the forgotten texts, the ones the Church sealed away for 17 centuries, into a single guide for those who feel the pull towards something deeper. Because whether we speak of the archons, the demiurge, or the divine spark, one truth remains. This knowledge was never meant to be lost. This is for anyone who senses there's more to this reality than we've been told, and who's ready to remember it. You'll find it in the link in the description below, or you can scan the QR code right here. I'll give you a moment to do that. What I am claiming is that within the symbolic and contemplative framework of Gnostic cosmology, these 5 stones were understood as material correspondences to qualities that directly oppose archonic function. That's a meaningful claim. It's historically grounded, and it has practical implications for how you might use them, not as talismans, but as focal objects for a specific quality of interior practice. The first is obsidian. The Apocryphon of John, in its enumeration of the archons, associates the first and most fundamental archonic quality with what the text calls a lion-faced force, arrogance, the declaration of false sovereignty. I am God, and there is no other God beside me. That's the demiurge's foundational error, and it filters down through every layer of archonic administration. The corresponding quality that dissolves arrogance, in Gnostic terms, is radical transparency, seeing through the claim rather than being dazzled by it. Obsidian, volcanic glass, has been associated with precisely this quality across multiple ancient traditions entirely independent of each other. Its surface both reflects and absorbs. It shows you your own image without flattering it. In contemplative practice, it was used as a focal object not to see outward, but to see clearly, to strip the false framing from what you're observing. As a counter-signature to the archon of arrogance, obsidian represents the refusal to be deceived by authoritative appearances. The second is lapis lazuli. The archonic quality it corresponds to is what the texts call ignorance, not simple lack of knowledge, but the active suppression of recognition. The second of the 7 archons in the Apocryphon of John is associated specifically with the maintenance of unknowing. Lapis lazuli's significance here runs through Egyptian, Sumerian, and early Christian mystical writing. It was the stone of the vault of heaven, the reminder that what appears as ceiling is actually depth. In Gnostic symbolic use, it corresponds to the quality of gnosis itself, the recognition that what you thought was a boundary is actually an opening. I want to stop here for a moment, because this next piece of research is where something shifted for me personally. I spent an entire afternoon, longer than I'd planned, cross-referencing the descriptions of sacred stones in the Pistis Sophia with parallel references in the Nag Hammadi text known as the Tripartite Tractate. What I found was not a simple list of recommended minerals. What I found was a structured, symbolic opposition. a one-to-one mapping between specific archonic deficiencies and specific material qualities that the texts associated with pleronic light. These weren't random, they were deliberate. Someone, likely multiple communities across several generations, had built a coherent system of material contemplative anchors. The third stone is clear quartz. This one is the most broadly recognized and also, for that reason, the most misunderstood in contemporary spiritual culture. Within Gnostic symbolism, clear quartz corresponds to the quality of undivided light, the pleroma before fragmentation. The archonic quality it opposes is what the texts describe as multiplicity without unity, the condition of being endlessly dispersed across sensation, desire, distraction, the surface texture of material experience. Clear quartz, in its transparency, was understood as a material reminder of what undiffused light looks like, and by extension, what undiffused attention feels like. The fourth is bloodstone, also called heliotrope in ancient sources. This one has a more specific textual home. The Pistis Sophia, a complex Gnostic text that takes the form of a dialogue between the risen Christ and his disciples, including Mary Magdalene, contains extended discussion of what it means to maintain divine orientation while fully embodied in matter. Bloodstone, with its combination of deep green and red, was associated in ancient use with the capacity to remain vital, grounded, and incorruptible simultaneously. The archonic quality it counters is what the texts call desire for domination, the fourth archon's characteristic mode, which in human terms expresses as the compulsion to resolve tension through force rather than through recognition. Bloodstone, symbolically, holds both the vital and the incorruptible in the same object without resolving the tension. That's its contemplative function. The fifth is moldavite, and this one is genuinely unusual, not because it carries more power than the others, but because its material origin is itself cosmologically resonant within Gnostic thought. Moldavite is a tektite. It formed approximately 15 million years ago from the impact of a meteorite with the Earth's surface. It is, literally, matter transformed by an encounter with something from beyond the system. In Gnostic symbolic terms, that's not incidental. The archons govern this world. What comes from beyond this world carries, at least symbolically, a signature they did not generate and cannot fully administer. The fifth archon in the Apocryphon of John is associated with what the text calls the desire for return without the willingness to transform. Moldavite, as extraterrestrial material that nonetheless exists within material reality, represents the integration of beyond-system origin with fully embodied presence. That's the countersignature to the fifth archonic deficiency, not escape, but transformation in place. Now here's where it gets cosmically significant. We've moved through 5 stones, 5 archonic signatures, 5 counter frequencies. And if you've been tracking the pattern, you're starting to understand that this isn't folk magic. It isn't crystal healing in the generic wellness sense. This is a specific cosmological map, and the stones are points on it. The sixth archon in the Apocryphon of John is associated with what the text describes as a kind of foolish wisdom. Not ignorance, something more insidious. The sixth archonic quality is the accumulation of knowledge that reinforces the cage rather than dismantling it. It's the spiritual collector. The person who knows every tradition, has read every text, has the terminology fluent on their tongue, and has used all of that to construct an even more sophisticated prison for themselves. That's not an accident. The archons, in Gnostic cosmology, don't just suppress the divine spark through ignorance, they suppress it through misdirection. And misdirected knowledge is one of the most elegant traps in the system. I've been close to that trap. I'll be honest about it. There was a period, maybe 2 years into serious study, where I had built an enormous internal architecture of Gnostic concepts. I could explain the emanations of the pleroma, walk through the fall of Sophia, distinguish between the different textual traditions at Nag Hammadi. and I was using all of it to stay at a safe intellectual distance from the actual interior work. I was treating Gnosis like a library rather than a threshold. That's not Gnosis, that's just a library card. The stone tradition associates obsidian with the 6th arcanic counterfrequency, and I want to be precise about why that association holds up symbolically, because the reasoning is exact. Obsidian is volcanic glass. It forms when lava cools so rapidly that no crystalline structure has time to develop. The result is a material with no internal grain, no hidden seams. It fractures in completely predictable razor-sharp lines. Ancient cultures across Mesoamerica, the Mediterranean, and the Near East used obsidian not only as a cutting tool, but as a mirror. A polished obsidian surface reflects. It shows you what is there, without distortion, without beautification. That's the symbolic counter to the 6th archon's misdirected wisdom. Obsidian doesn't accumulate, it clarifies. It cuts through the elaborate conceptual structure and reflects back the actual state. If the trap is sophisticated self-deception, dressed as spiritual knowledge, obsidian's symbolic function is the mirror that makes that deception visible. Not comfortable, not flattering, accurate. When I started working with obsidian intentionally, and I want to be clear that I mean this as focused, symbolic contemplation, not passive carrying, something shifted in how I related to my own study. I started noticing when I was reaching for a concept to avoid an experience. That's the razor quality. It cuts toward the honest reading. The 7th archon. This is the one the text treats with the most gravity. The Apocryphon of John identifies the 7th arcanic quality as a kind of final veil, the closest boundary to the divine spark, and therefore the most charged. The 7th quality is associated with what the tradition calls the illusion of separation itself. The deep, architecturally embedded conviction that the divine is somewhere other than here, that the pleroma is a destination rather than an origin, that the work is about getting to something rather than recognizing something already present. This is the archon that sits at the threshold, and it's the most sophisticated of the 7 because it mimics spiritual seeking. It keeps you searching. Not in a way that feels obstructive, in a way that feels like progress. The seeking becomes the substitute for the arrival. The path becomes the reason not to stop and recognize where you already are. The stone associated with the 7th counterfrequency is shungite. This is where the symbolic logic becomes almost uncomfortably precise. Shungite is found primarily in the Karelia region of Russia, near Lake Onega, in deposits estimated at 2 billion years old. 2 billion. That places shungite's formation at a point in Earth's history before complex life existed. It is, in geological terms, primordial matter, material that predates the entire biological experiment. And its composition is unique. It contains fullerenes, carbon molecules arranged in spherical, cage-like structures, which exist almost nowhere else in nature. The symbolic register here is significant. Shungite is ancient beyond comprehension, structured in a form that resembles containment, the cage-like fullerene, and yet it is precisely that structure that gives it its unusual electromagnetic and purifying properties. It is a cage that functions as a filter, not a prison. The 7th archon presents separation as fundamental reality. Shungite, symbolically, represents primordial presence, the material that was here before the story of separation began. Carrying it, working with it, is a way of anchoring consciousness to a pre-separation signature. Not escaping the world, not transcending the body, but touching through a material intermediary, something that predates the architecture of division. 5, 6, 7. 3 stones left to discuss, 3 archonic signatures addressed. But I want to stay with 7 for a moment, because this one is personal in a way I didn't expect. I'm Daniel, and this is Gnostic Talk, and I want to tell you what actually happened. For a long time, I had been working with individual stones, one at a time, matched to specific arcanic qualities I was trying to address in my own interior work. Labradorite, when I was working through the first archon signature of false authority. Obsidian, when I caught myself in the sixth archon's trap of accumulated knowledge standing in for actual experience. But I had never carried all five together. The first five I settled on were clear quartz, black tourmaline, labradorite, moldavite, and obsidian. The reasoning I've walked you through, the specific arcanic countersignatures, the textual grounding in the Apocryphon of John, the symbolic logic of each material's formation and properties. I want to be clear, I went into this with my skepticism intact. I am not someone who approaches this kind of work with uncritical enthusiasm. I've spent enough time in the Nag Hammadi texts to know that Gnostic practice is not about wishful thinking dressed in ancient vocabulary. The Gnostic tradition at its core is ruthlessly discerning. It does not reward sentimentality. I carried them for 7 consecutive days. Small pouch, inside pocket, close to the body. I wasn't performing ritual. I wasn't setting intentions in the way that phrase usually gets used. I was doing something more specific. I was using the physical presence of each stone as an anchor for a particular kind of attention, a trained noticing of when each arcanic pattern was active in my experience during the day. When I felt the pull of false authority, someone else's framework trying to colonize my direct knowing, I'd become aware of the clear quartz against my chest, not as magic, as a mnemonic, a reminder to locate my own inner witness. Here's what I didn't expect. By the third day, the noticing wasn't effortful anymore. The patterns I'd been trying to catch, the moments of unconscious submission, the habit of outsourcing discernment, the reach for intellectual complexity when interior simplicity was what was needed, they became visible almost automatically. Not because the stones were doing something supernatural, because I had anchored 5 distinct quality recognitions to 5 distinct physical objects, and the objects were always with me. That's a technology, a modest, entirely material technology, but it worked. A viewer named Cassiel left a comment on my video, "I stopped praying and called the monad instead. Here's what changed." And this one stopped me mid-scroll. They wrote, "I've been carrying stones for years without knowing why. Reading this, I think I was doing archon work the whole time without any framework for it. That's a strange kind of accidental gnosis." That hit me exactly right, because that's precisely what this tradition suggests is possible. The divine spark doesn't wait for you to have the correct conceptual framework before it begins navigating. It uses what's available. Sometimes the framework comes after the experience, and the framework's job is to make the experience legible, not to produce it. But there was something else that happened on day 5. And I want to be precise about this because I am not in the business of manufacturing spiritual drama for the sake of a compelling story. On the 5th day, I was in a particularly difficult conversation, the kind where you can feel the pull to abandon your own perception in favor of social harmony, where agreement is easier than truth. The first archon pattern, false authority in its most socially sophisticated form. And I became aware, very suddenly, of all 5 stones simultaneously, not as separate presences, as one field. I personally think this is the most underrated aspect of working with multiple stones in a cosmologically coherent system. Not any individual stone's quality, but the compound field that emerges when all 5 arcanic countersignatures are present together. The texts don't describe this explicitly, but the logic of the cosmology implies it. The archons operate as a system. Their counter-frequencies, when activated together, do something different than any one of them does alone. I held my own ground in that conversation. That sounds small. It wasn't. It was the kind of moment where, 6 months earlier, I would have collapsed into accommodation and spent 3 days afterward reconstructing my own sense of what I actually think. This time, I didn't. I'm not attributing that to the stones in some external mechanistic sense. I'm attributing it to what the stones had trained my attention to do. There's a difference. Some of the most important work in the Nag Hammadi corpus, including the Pistis Sophia, describes Gnosis not as a single illuminating event, but as a progressive clarification, a gradual becoming transparent of the archonic structures that have been running as background operating system. Each recognition is a small emancipation. None of them is the final one, but they accumulate. 7 days of carrying all 5 together. The accumulation is real, and it builds towards something. Let's come back to Shungite, because the 7th Archon deserves more than a cosmological footnote. The illusion of separation. That's what we're working with here. And I want to frame what I mean precisely, because this is where Gnostic cosmology either lands as the most radical framework you've ever encountered, or collapses into vague spirituality, depending entirely on how you hold it. The Archons in the Apocryphon of John are not simply external oppressors. They are internalized structures. The Gnostic texts describe them as having participated in the construction of the human being, layered into the perceptual architecture itself. When the Apocryphon lists the qualities the Archons implanted, they read like a description of the default human operating system. Ignorance, attachment to false authority, premature certainty, misdirected wisdom, compulsive seeking without a rival. These are not character flaws, they are designed features. The 7th Archon's signature, the deep conviction of separation, is not a belief you consciously hold. It is the water you swim in. It is the assumption underneath every other assumption. The pleroma is over there. The divine is above. The spark is buried under accumulated layers of false self, and you haven't dug far enough yet. More practice, more study, more time. Do you see the trap? The seeking is the 7th Archon's mechanism. It doesn't prevent you from seeking the divine. It converts the seeking into the thing that keeps the divine at arm's length. As I covered in my video, which level of the pleroma is your soul from? The Gnostic understanding of the pleroma is not a destination with a map and a distance. The pleroma is the fullness that exists prior to the appearance of lack. The spark within you is not a fragment that left and needs to return. It is a presence that has never actually departed, only been rendered invisible by layers of archonic patterning. Shungite, carried with this understanding active, functions as a material anchor for the counter-experience of that 7th signature. Its 2 billion-year existence is a way of touching, through your hand, through your pocket, through your presence, a material that was here before the construction of separation, before the demiurge's architecture, before the 7 layers were put in place. I know how this sounds. I do. It sounds like attribution of metaphysical significance to a rock. And you're not wrong to push back on that. But stay with me for a moment. The Gnostic tradition has never argued that material objects carry inherent magical properties. What the tradition argues is that material objects can function as anchors for a particular quality of attention, and that quality of attention is itself transformative. The stone is not doing the work. Your encounter with the stone, framed within a specific cosmological understanding, is doing the work. The Shungite is a threshold marker, a physical reminder that you are, right now, standing at the boundary of the 7th Archon's territory. And you can choose, in this moment, with this breath, to recognize the spark rather than to seek it. That distinction matters enormously. Recognition is not seeking. Recognition is stopping the seeking long enough to notice what has always been present. The 5 stones together, clear quartz, black tourmaline, labradorite, moldavite, obsidian, plus shungite at the 7th position, do not constitute a complete talisman in the superstitious sense. They constitute a portable cosmological map. Each stone is a point of contact with one specific archonic counterfrequency. Carrying them is a way of keeping the entire map of liberation available to your body, not just your intellect, throughout the day. The Pistis Sophia describes the process of liberation from the archonic layers as involving what the text calls the recognition of their forms. You cannot move past what you cannot see. Each stone, worked with intentionally, trains a specific kind of seeing. The clear quartz trains you to see false authority. The black tourmaline trains you to see fear of embodiment being passed off as spiritual wisdom. Labradorite trains you to see the threshold moments when gnosis is available and you're talking yourself out of it. Moldavite trains you to recognize the fifth archon's pull toward escape without transformation. Obsidian holds the mirror for the sixth, showing you when your knowledge is serving your liberation and when it is substituting for it. And Shungite. Shungite trains you to notice the moment when you have stopped seeking and started recognizing. That moment when the gap closes, not through effort, but through the sudden, quiet cessation of the effort to find something that was never lost. Stop searching for the divine from a distance. Start recognizing that the distance is the seventh archon's most persistent illusion. You were not made to carry these stones as ornaments. You were not made to accumulate spiritual vocabulary or beautiful cosmological frameworks that keep you intellectually satisfied and interiorly unmoved. You were made, according to the Gnostic tradition, as a vessel for a spark that is not yours in the sense of possession, but yours in the sense of identity. It doesn't need to be found, it needs to be acknowledged. These 5 stones, and the 2 we've also walked through at positions 6 and 7, are not the answer. They are a set of questions you can keep in your pocket. Questions that, if you let them, will keep asking themselves against your skin all day long. Who is it that fears the archons? Who is it that recognizes them? And what is the difference between those two things? If this landed somewhere real for you, I want to hear about it. Leave a comment below telling me which of the 7 archonic signatures you feel most active in your own experience right now. Name it. That act of naming is itself a counter frequency. That's the beginning of the work.